Welcome to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your host, Mickey Huff. This week, we revisit a topic that is certainly not foreign to our audience. We're going to be talking about banned books once again, and I realize that it is February and Banned Books Week with the American Library Association and the Great Banned Books Week Coalition, of which Project Censored is a longtime member, isn't until the last week of September, the first week of October. But for the last several years, we've been revisiting the topic of book bans and censorship and challenges more frequently because these challenges and bans have unfortunately been more frequent. Today, we have two amazing expert guests that I'd like to introduce to you, Allyson Rice and Dorri C. Allyson Rice is the filmmaker behind a recent documentary called Banned Together. It is a diverse cast of visionary teenagers stirring public protests, private threats, criminal charges, and drama-filled school board meetings. And this is the explosive world of Banned Together. The film pulls back the curtain on two of the most controversial issues in America today, book bans and curriculum censorship in public schools. Banned Together follows three students as they fight to reinstate 97 books suddenly pulled from their school libraries. As they evolve from local to national activists, the film reveals the dark forces behind the accelerating wave of book bans in the U.S. Allyson Rice is producer and part owner of Atomic Focus Entertainment, where she is one of the producers of this new documentary feature film, Banned Together, about fighting the spread of book bans and academic censorship in the U.S. BannedTogetherDoc.com. You can get more information there. And before Atomic Focus, Allyson was the Associate Director of Creative Development and a producer for the Stage Network, which is streaming, where she helped develop both scripted and unscripted content across multiple genres. Allyson originally spent 15 years as an actress in the theater and on TV with Family Ties, The Wayans Brothers, and many, many other programs. Spent a decade leading personal growth retreats around the country before coming back to the entertainment industry, but on the other side of the camera. Allyson is author of the award-winning novel, The Key to Circus Mom Highway, and is an award-winning narrator of the audiobook of the same name. She's created a line of women's coloring books, Original Art and Writing, and was co-creator of the Creative Prosperity Play Deck, an inspirational card deck for unblocking your creative flow. Allyson is an accomplished mixed media artist and photographer and alum of Northwestern University. Allyson Rice, welcome to the Project Censored Show.
Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge the rest of the team first. We did this project with a small but mighty team. Jen Wiggin is another producer, and our two director producers are Kate Way and Tom Wiggin. So we did this sort of unfolding story and had to jump into the deep end because it was unfolding as we went. So
absolutely. Well, we'll get into some of the details of the film. I want to hear more about the background, what got you into it. But before we do that, I want to introduce our other guest, who is Dorri C, the CEO and practice owner of The Wise Woman and founder publisher of the Virginia Woman Magazine Media Group. Infused by homemade love and voices from Global Kitchen, she leads, lifts, and inspires audiences worldwide from the classroom to the boardroom. With an infectious personality, wisdom, truth-telling, kindness, and heart. A graduate of Harvard Business School, Dorri holds a master's degree in social work, a bachelor's in political science, and will complete her doctorate in educational leadership and organizational innovation in spring 2025. Dorri is an educator, clinical social worker, author, and workshop facilitator. She's a very passionate leader of a national campaign and book club, Read the Banned Book. From her research and dissertation, she advocates worldwide to stop the mounting ban on books in public schools and libraries. Dorri is also dedicated to social justice, equity, mental health, wellness, and raising the power of girls and women's voices. Her not-for-profit Women's Institute for Leadership in Life, WILL, W-I-L-L-L, and Leadership Sister Circles educate, advocate, and promote tolerance, leadership, acceptance, and kindness. And here we are. Dorri is also an expert in critical race theory. And of course, that's something that's been swirling around certainly the misapplication and misunderstanding in the general public around critical race theory as it relates to banned books. Dorri Scott, I want to welcome you to the Project Censored Show as well.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Let's dive in. Allyson, let's go back to you. I'm sorry I interrupted you and you were on a roll talking about how you got into this project, what drove you to do it, and why we need this feature-length documentary band together. Allyson Rice.
Well, first of all, Atomic Focus Entertainment, like we're all big readers, we're big supporters of the literary community. We do a podcast called Always Authors, where it's just two authors in conversation. So it always goes in fun directions. Atomic Focus has also filmed the Charleston Literary Festival for a few years now. What the impetus for the film was when Jen and Tom, who live in South Carolina, saw a local paper profiling some students that were fighting back against books that were suddenly removed from their school, and they thought this would make a great story. So they reached out, found out that there was another woman who had already just started filming down there, and that was Kate Way. And she was planning on making a short film about this subject. And Jen and Tom approached her and said, "We think this could be a bigger film. We'd like to partner." So that's how we all came together. And I was in the middle of book release activities. So Jen called me and said, "As soon as you're done with all this book release stuff, we've got a project." So because they live in South Carolina and because Kate was already down there filming, I focused my energy on the national story, because what we do is we're following these students. So you get kind of a blueprint about how these book bans go into effect and how people can fight back at the local level. So that's what the student storyline shows. And then we wrapped the larger national picture around their local story so that people, we wanted to connect a lot of dots that were happening, because when we started, there still wasn't a lot about book bans in the news. There was some, we knew about it, but they weren't really covering it a lot at that point. So that's kind of how the film started.
Yeah, it's very important to raise the awareness around this issue. A lot of people don't seem to think it's as widespread of a phenomenon as it is. And of course, the incoming Trump administration basically just declared, the U.S. Education Department said that this is some kind of a hoax, that there's actually not a spate of these kind of book bans going on. They want to turn their attention away from it. This, despite the fact that PEN America tracked more than 10,000 public school bans in the 2023-24 school year. So it's pretty amazing. I guess like climate crisis is a hoax. Now book banning is a hoax. We're not supposed to believe the numbers, believe the stories in your film and from many other students across the country. Dorri Scott, let's bring you in here. And let's add to that. I mean, it's something that you're studying and you're doing a lot of work around. Hardly a hoax, the banning of books. Dorri Scott.
Absolutely, there is no hoax on it. And let me just say this, as the rise has gone up with books banning, people read less in this country. One of the reasons I wanted to get involved with this project, and I love this team that I'm working with, I'm their research scholar, is because as we understand any information, we need data behind it. I'm the research scholar. So what are the numbers that tell us where we're going, how we're going? And I'm telling you, book bans are rising because we are a country of people who read less. So what I do in the story is I look at, why are we reading less? What are we reading? And who are we getting rid of in the books that we ban? And when we look at that list, we're looking at LGBTQA+, we're looking at people of color, we're looking at how we treat people who are Jewish, and top books that are banned: Toni Morrison, James Baldwin. Can you believe this? Anne Frank. Come on, Charlotte Webb. I mean, really? Didn't we read these books as children? And the reasons that were banned make very little sense to those of us who love books.
I have to unfortunately agree that book banning is on the rise, that we are reading less as a society. There's only 5 states that even mandate media literacy, which is pretty extraordinary. The degree of media illiteracy in the United States, coupled with civic and historical literacy, the banning of books obviously just exacerbates that. And Dorri, the other troubling trend that you pointed to isn't just the number of bans or challenges of books. It's the type or the kind, the authors, the kind of people that are trying to tell their stories or the people that are the subjects of these stories. And you're also an expert in critical race theory. And of course, the Trump administration has basically declared an all out war on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And look, as we see from the statistics, many of the books that are being challenged are about LGBTQIA plus people, minority communities, marginalized voices. Dorri, talk to us a little bit more about the significant threat that this poses to these groups.
Well, let's just start with number one. People don't understand what critical race theory is. It's a theory. It is not something that is taught in high schools, which is a lie that's put out there that they teach you K through 12. It is a theorist, just like W.B. Du Bois had his whole social dualities. He taught that in college. And what it does is it looks at systems and how when we aggregate the numbers, aggregate people, aggregate how we see things, we say, oh, this is what's happening with that particular group. And we can now break it down to race. We can break it down to sex. We can break it down to gender. And that's what this is all about. This was founded by a gentleman named Derek Bell, who was a professor up at Harvard University. He did this years ago, but it's not about people. So people say things like, well, I'm not a racist. Well, we're not calling you a racist. We're saying critical race theory looks at systems and how people are impacted by those systems that we live through every day.
And again,
Right.
it's the systemic analysis that's missing. Allyson, come on and jump in here.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because this is one of the tactics that some of the parental rights groups are using. And we kind of focused on Moms for Liberty in our film. They're certainly not the only parental rights group, but they are the ones that grew the fastest, that was embraced by conservative America. And so that's kind of who we're following. So what they do, they, along the lines of critical race theory, they have made that into like a scary thing. And because they're trying to mobilize parents through fear. So they've turned critical race theory, they try to make it seem like the word critical is about criticizing white people instead of critical being critical thinking and critical analysis. And they've applied it to every single book that touches on the subject of race in America, that touches on racial prejudice in America, and they call it CRT, and that's just not it. And they also use terms like pornography because they know that that creates a huge emotional charge in someone who hears that. When parents are told, "Hey, your children are being given pornography in public schools," parents get really afraid. So they're using the term children, even though books that tend to have sexual content, it's either about going through puberty, which those have been banned, or it's about sexual identity, and those are geared toward older teenagers. But they're using the term children. So little kids aren't getting these books. It's older teenagers. So those are some of the tactics that they use. They're trying to mobilize parents to do their work for them. And then legislation is introduced in conservative states that are making it easier for one person to ban a huge amount of books without having to read them. And that goes to the thing about we don't read in this country anymore. So you're getting parents who aren't reading the books, parents who I don't even know if they read books, and they're the ones banning all the books and keeping them away from your children being able to access them in schools.
Yeah.
This is kind of an astroturfed campaign, Moms from Liberty, and it's spread all across the country. And, even though when we look at book bans and percentages, they're often associated with Florida. 45% of bans occurred in Florida, 36% in Iowa. But, more than half the states in the U.S. have seen legislation to curtail curriculum. So, Dorri, I wanted to come back to you on this, that it's not just, one person like having a list of 100 books that they want to ban, which is kind of crazy because it used to be you had to go through each one and you had to have reasons and so on. So they've kind of streamlined that process. And in addition to banning books or challenging books at local schools, Moms for Liberty has actually they've made efforts to try to replace people on school boards, in faraway communities where they don't even live. I was in Northern California for decades, and, the Bay Area in particular has a sort of a rap for being a blue bubble and so on. But there were several very close school board races in the area from astroturfed candidates that were talking about, again, quote, parental rights, other kind of euphemisms and things to say what they were concerned about in schools. And they did win in school boards across the country. I can say they did not win in the one local area where near the college where I've taught for a long time, but it was very remarkably close. So let's talk a little bit maybe about some of those tactics, Dorri, but also, again, given some of your background, there's a whole onslaught on academic freedom happening across the country.
Well, is there? I wonder. We talk about this academic freedom. We talk about democracy, but I'm not seeing people step up and have the courage to really take the stand, except for the groups that I'm involved with, like this particular film. People are afraid to stand up and be courage. We're talking about dismantling the Department of Education, who was the woman that's working with this group. She was with this Moms for Liberty group. She was one of the big people in this. And now we're getting rid of education. But let's go back to the real truth, and that is, W.B. Du Bois said it very succinctly. He said, America has a race problem. And this race problem is so part of who we are. That lie that's been told over years is really now coming to place. And there's a place that people want to protect a whiteness that says Black people don't live, immigrants need to go home. If you're queer, you need to get away. If you're a woman, we don't want you to do that if you want your reproductive rights. These are the kinds of stories that are not being told. And banned books is just part of that same story.
So, Allyson, let's talk a little bit about that same issue and the groups like Moms for Liberty. There are other groups. Again, banned books often is seen as sort of a local issue, but this is a nationwide phenomenon that's been happening. It's been on the uptick for years. Banned Books Week goes back to 1982 on the heels of a Supreme Court case. Talk a little bit about some of the other efforts, related efforts to challenge curriculum, to talk about how I'm an historian by day, and fortunately I do teach college, so I do have some more academic freedom about the kind of things that I'm teaching in the classroom. But there are whole efforts to just erase entire parts and people of our history going on that are part of the campaign of banned books to silence more marginalized communities. Allyson Rice.
Okay. So I'm confused about the question that you're asking in there.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the related efforts, not just book bans directly. We're going to get to that a little more after the break, but this effort to change curriculum, to have statewide laws passed that tell you what you can teach in a Florida classroom, for example.
Yeah, so Florida started the whole thing. So we do go down to Florida in the film, even though that's not part of the South Carolina high school students that we were following, because that's really where they started it, and they've been the most successful there. So you got Moms for Liberty, who says we don't co-parent with the government, but that's all they do. They are like married to the government, and they are passing laws, they're passing legislation that it's really African American studies, African American history. Those are the courses that are being denied credit anymore. In Florida, they had the whole thing about saying that slavery was beneficial to enslaved people because they learned all these great trades that they could apply. So they're trying to rewrite history. And then you've got South Carolina, where our local story is focused. And South Carolina has been working really hard to become the new Florida, and they are being successful. So you've got Ellen Weaver, who is she is the superintendent of education in the state of South Carolina. So her office, they have canceled credit for African American history classes. She's talking about doing schools in like little micro schools in churches. And she is a big Moms for Liberty supporter. So when you go in and what Ellen Weaver's office can do now is if a parent complains about books, certain books, they can review it. And if they decide they don't want that book in the schools, it's denied in every school in the state now. So, Josh Malkin in the South Carolina ACLU was talking about this at one of our panels, and he was saying it's any bodily function, any books that deal with that. There's a book called Everyone Poops, and it's about potty training. And high school students do not have access to that. They can't read that in school because it deals with, excrement. So it's anything like that. And they go in and they change the laws and they take it away from everyone. And there's very little recourse once they do that. It's all in favor of the people trying to ban the books or take away the credit from certain academic courses.
Well,
And if
Allyson Rice, there's certainly plenty of excrement coming out of the White House and the current administration around these kinds of issues and justifications, not even justifications, but outright denying, calling it a hoax, that there is a sort of an epidemic of challenges to books in this country. And we wanted to get a little bit more specific because, Dorri Scott, you in your bio, you were talking a little bit about the kind of research that you're doing, and you're getting an educational leadership doctorate. And so in our initial part of our conversation, you talked about how you provide a lot of research and data for the film. The title of your research was a qualitative phenomenological study addressing the impact of banned books on college students. So can you unpack that for our audience, and what does the title mean? And why are you doing the study on banned books and how it affects college students? I think this is a very, very important thing. Tell us about this.
Well, educators like these fancy words. Basically, what we're doing is that's all we're doing. But here's the thing. We're looking at the stories of 4 women. 3 are in the documentary. One was a young woman who served as the city mayor, the student mayor for Washington, D.C., and they were involved in banned books. What we wanted to understand was their story. And so one of the things that's come out is when these young women started with this particular story, they were not banned initially. The books were not. One even shared in the story about how they came to her classroom, brought together a little mobile, and said, you must put the books on this particular mobile. You can no longer read the book. And that's how they found out the book was banned. The other thing people need to recognize is it only takes one person in your community on your board of education. I'm in Northern Virginia. There was a big deal in Loudoun County where people came and said, we want that book banned. They will not allow the book. And one person can say, we don't want this book because, and then they can fill in the blank, and that book can be banned. That's what happens. But what these women are doing is they're sharing their stories so that we can understand how we can make a difference with banned books. And the one thing we've got to do is pay attention to what's going on with boards of education in the communities where we live, because that's where the power is. They pick the books that we read. They pick all of the texts that we use. They select all of the work that we do. They own the power. And if we're not getting in there with our boards of education, we're going to continue to lose this fight.
So Dorri, just for our listeners, remind them the process. There's a challenge, then there's a ban, and I know some of those on the other side who are talking about how it's not banning, it's just removing them from the shelf, and they're still accessible, and they do a whole lot of sort of mental gymnastics to avoid the censorship, kind of terminology. Can you talk a little bit about that and unpack the process of how this is happening?
Sure. So a challenge book would be like a book in waiting. She's kind of like the bridesmaid. Okay. And think about it that way. The banned book is like the bride. That means the book is off. And simply one has to show up at a board meeting, write a letter to someone on their board and tell them, we don't want this book to be part of the curriculum. And then that book is taken off. The American Library Association is the one that really controls those books that are banned. So that's what that process does. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but just think about that. The bride, the bridesmaid, the book, you go in, you say, I don't want it, and that's how it happens.
Yeah, it's unfortunately seemingly rather simple to get a book in hot water in a particular area, and particularly, I mentioned the Bay Area before. In some areas where maybe literacy levels are higher, or people maybe put more value on education, maybe people are a little more aware that these kind of things are issues. But this is a phenomenon that's sweeping the country. It's happening all over, and I mentioned an example in the Bay Area, and just north of Sacramento even, where people kind of think that, like, well, this is a pretty liberal area, but there are rather extraordinary challenges. And again, they do address the school board. They go after school board members and put political pressure on people. So Allyson, I just wanted to come back to you a little bit about the film itself, and in the process of making the film. Can you talk to us a little bit about what were some of the major challenges you had And also, what's the national impact campaign that you're doing around this?
Well, to start, raising money for documentaries is always a challenge. And ever since the pandemic, because I was looking into a lot of grants when we first started, and a lot of the grant programs that used to be out there are no longer there. So, we're still raising money to pay off the final bills of the thing. It's been a constant challenge. And also having a small team, normally there would be a team of 8 to 10 people, and there are 4 of us and sometimes just 3 of us doing all the work. So that's a challenge. But it was also a challenge in the post-production process, getting this film down to 90 minutes. Our first cut was 2 hours, and we had so much incredible information that we got from people in interviews that already wasn't included. So it was a challenge to get it down to 90 minutes, which is what everybody wanted for a documentary, and still get enough information in there so that we're touching on all of these different topics to give as broad a picture of what's happening as we can, so that it's not just focused on this one little area. So there are a lot of topics that we touch on that we just didn't have the time to go into them any deeper. But crafting the story in a way that makes it clear how those things are fitting into the bigger picture. Those are some of the bigger challenges that we had. The impact campaign we are going to be doing throughout this year, and we're going to be traveling around the country and holding panels and doing, live screenings for people so we can keep the conversation going. And the National Education Association and PFLAG have come on as national sponsors, and Interfaith Alliance has come on as a local sponsor. So we're getting people to help us do that so that we can fund the National Impact Campaign.
So, Dorri, coming back to you, students are really on the kind of the front line when it comes to the book bannings in our schools, followed by, of course, their teachers, librarians, right? And it's oftentimes students that go to the school board that will complain about these kinds of challenges. Can you address it all? What kind of risks are these people involved in? What are they sacrificing by speaking up for the First Amendment and speaking up for those voices that are being further suppressed?
I don't want to sound like I'm overreacting, but I think on some level it's their lives.
Yeah.
Because librarians have lost their jobs. I think that teachers are not allowed to talk about this in the classroom. If they take the book off of the shelf and you cannot teach it, and a student asks and you're not allowed to answer the question, what's the answer? There is none. But librarians that have put themselves out there, and when we go to the library is more than getting a book. It's about where you can get your passport picture taken. I mean, if this is a resource in the community that we paid for in our our tax dollars. So again, what's at risk? Our lives. And just us doing this film, those of us, we are at risk. We've had to put in some protective ways to protect ourselves so that we know that when we step out and use our names, that people will not come after us. And particularly, I want to talk about the women that are involved in this film, me and a woman of color, because it's easy to target one who's of color who talks about books. This is not about Black books. This is about books that are banned, that are hurting children the opportunity to critically think, to censor how they want to live. These are some serious issues that we're dealing with. And one other thing I want to say, Allyson didn't mention this, but this is important. The Gates Foundation is allowing us to tell our story. This is powerful that our team was able to get Gates Foundation to look at this. We don't know where this is going to go. We just know we have a story to tell, and we're going to do our best to get it out there.
Yeah,
Well,
there
for
are there are
Go
if
ahead,
I
Alison.
could just add on
Yeah,
that,
please do.
there are a lot of organizations, because we're going to be releasing the film widely on streaming platforms in mid-April. But up until then, we are holding screenings for organizations who are interested in this, and there's some very big organizations who have been great promoters of our film and partnering with us in that way. People like PEN America, American Library Association, the Educational Book and Media Association, which is publishers, Gates Foundation, like Dorri mentioned, the Pat Conroy Literary Center, Families Against Book Bans, Interfaith Alliance, National Education Association, PFLAG, Association of School Librarians. There's so many incredible organizations who have supported us in doing this. I did want to go back to something that Dorri was talking about with the harassment, because what is happening is threats of violence, harassment and threats of violence to librarians and teachers around this country. They are being doxxed online. Their personal information, their home addresses are being put out there. Their children's names are being put out there. They're being called pedophiles, which is that is so upsetting to me, because anybody who has had experience in the past, and one of the women who talks about the harassment, she went through childhood sexual abuse. So for her to be called a pedophile is extremely damaging. And you're getting this all around the country. In every state in this country, this is happening to teachers and librarians. And I think that is criminal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're certainly very happy to be hosting you later this year in the fall. Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College and Project Censored will have you for a screening. Where can people, you mentioned it's going to be streaming in April. I mentioned the website bandtogetherdoc.com. Is there anywhere people can get more involved, see the film, contact you, anything like that, set up showings? Allyson Rice, and then we'll go to Dorri Scott.
Yeah, you can go to our website and send us an email if you're interested in doing a screening for your organization. And we have the ability now through the Eventive platform. It's eventive.org. So we have held virtual screenings for people around the country, and that's what we're doing with the Gates Foundation. They're getting like a 5-day window for people to watch whenever it works for them. And then Dorri and I are going to be in DC at the Gates office, and we're going to be doing a live stream Q&A with people at that point. So people can contact us if they want to do something with their organization. We are also going to, one thing that we did was on inauguration/MLK Day, we had an alternative programming event on Eventive where people could tune in and watch the film that day rather than watching the inauguration if they didn't want to. So we were celebrating MLK Day more than anything. We're going to be doing another one of those screenings in the month of March. So, go to our website, sign up to be, on a mailing list so that we can let you know when that's happening. But yeah, and then it'll be in wider release mid-April.
That's great. And the website is bandtogetherdoc.com. And Dorri Scott, last words for you.
Absolutely.
Any other things you'd like to add?
Absolutely. I'll be back in the classroom in the fall, teaching at George Washington University. I'm teaching a book, Black Thought Banned Books, and I'm going to focus mostly on those brown and black authors that are iconic, that their books are banned. I'm also on the site with Band Together. I've got my own site, www.dorri.c.scott. I want to just say this. I come from a family, we're not scared. We have fought. I've been part of the civil rights movement. My parents were part of the March on Washington. We're not scared. And like Dr. Maya Angelou said, still rising.
Well, absolutely, Dorri Scott. And we're certainly in the fight with you together in great solidarity. Dorri Scott, Allyson Rice, thank you so much for joining us on the Project Censored Show today. And of course, more so, thank you for the incredible and important work you're doing both inside and outside the classroom to raise awareness around intellectual freedom, academic freedom, and the problems that we're seeing around banned books. The film is Band Together. You can learn more at bandtogetherdoc.com. Dorri and Allyson, thanks again for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm grateful. Thank you.